Generally, I recommend drawing beginners when drawing from a photo, aim to draw actual size, same size as the photo. So where possible, if we print the photo off, to print off the size drawing we want to have. Sometimes that's not possible. How is it that we can deliberately change the size of our drawing in relation to the photo? Changing the scale is the technical term for this. So if we want to draw double the size of our photo, which is what I'm planning to do now, then that's a scale of 2:1. Every 2 units of our drawing represents 1 unit of our reference, but we could do 2:3 or 5:7 and so forth. The first thing I did was I found the center point of my building and I put a dot in the center point of my paper just to help me make sure I positioned it correctly, particularly since some of the paper is hidden under the photo. And basically, I'm seeking to draw every part twice the size. And so the very first thing I draw is important. The very first things that I draw are important. And I started with this straight beam, not beam, but this straight molding across the top of the entranceway. And I looked at my reference and I actually started in the center and went out on each side, looking at trying to put what the actual size in my photo was on each side of the center line. And that then becomes a ruler that I start to measure with. Now, obviously, by the time I'm speaking now, I've finished this drawing. And it pretty much is in proportion and it's double the size of the reference, with one exception. I've made my entrance too large. The arch doorway is too wide proportion-wise for the overall drawing. It's a bit larger than it should be. And that's always the challenge when we draw anything, but particularly when we're deliberately changing the scale, larger or smaller, of course, can be done as well. It's to keep all the proportions so that the shape looks the same. So if it's a square in the photo, it looks like a square in our drawing, regardless of the size. If it's a long, skinny, narrow rectangle, it looks like a long, skinny, narrow rectangle. If a window takes up half the height of a column in our reference, then in my drawing, I want that same window to take up half the height of the column, and so forth. If the width of the window is almost the whole distance between two other objects, then I want that to be the case in my drawing, regardless of the size of that window. So it's all about observing the proportions of the objects that we're drawing and then drawing them that size. And if it works, it will work all over. If I think that I'm doing okay, but then when I try and say fit a window into a space, my window has to be longer or narrower, but the one in the reference is squatter, is a fatter rectangle, then I haven't got my proportions of the space, of the overall space, accurate enough. And that's the problem. Now, as we grow our build-in, our drawing larger, we have more and more of it to reference from. While at the start, I literally was referencing off that straight beam-looking piece of moulding above the doorway, quite literally like a ruler. But as more of my drawing gets done, I can compare this part in the reference with a large part of what I've already drawn and work out the proportions, and that should help me become more accurate. Because the more things I can reference against, the less room there is for error to creep in. It is very annoying seeing this large gaping entranceway now that I'm more aware. Basically, what I did at the end to check my measurements, my proportions, was I got a sheet of paper and I lined it up with various architectural elements or widths, and I marked off on a scrap of paper the width on my photo, and then I put that on my drawing on the same place and doubled it. And if it was accurate, the end point lined up with my end point after I doubled it. And that's how I know that pretty much this whole thing is what I think is within a very respectable tolerance of accuracy, with the exception of this great big hole in the middle of the building. But never mind, this is a great little drawing exercise to do anyway. I deliberately printed this copy off smaller than I would normally draw from. But if you're not particularly interested in reducing the scale of a subject, or increasing, in this case, the scale of a subject, why not draw this little country building, little country civic building, as just a nice drawing exercise. I left the car out because I was wanting to showcase the building and the proportions of the building. But you'll find this, of course, on my posts page, this reference, and there'll be a link in the video description that will take you straight there. I'm drawing this with a 0.1mm pen, a finer pen than I normally draw with. But drawing with a finer pen means it's easier to do guide lines, guide type lines, which obviously are all still going to be there at the end. But if they're not quite right, we can then go over the lines that we want to emphasize and let those lines that aren't quite in the right place fade back a bit, because they're a bit thinner and lighter to begin with. So it all depends stylistically how we want our drawing to look at the end and the process we're using. But if we think we're going to be a little bit tentative with our mark making, as I was in this case compared to usual, I thought a finer pen was a good way to go. Now I'm trying to position these, I assume they're vents as well as decorative elements across the front. Now, when things are evenly spaced, as these are, and there's a definite center, then it's important to do our best to try and make them look even. Now, look at what I did. I did some dotted lines to give me a sense of the horizontal alignment. And I worked out then where the two center ones were going to be, because then I knew I had two smaller ones on each side. And notice how I capped them and bottomed them by going along in a straight line to make sure they were all lined up. I find that this is the most effective way to have these sorts of fairly small lined up details look sharp. And so now I'm coming to the lower half of our building. So I have to ignore the car, but that's okay, because except for the slope on the street, it's exactly the same on the left side as on the right side. And so now I'm paying attention to these moldings, this decorative stonework, pseudo stonework. I'm sure it's all plaster. Oh, I could be wrong. And trying to get the right number of lines going across of coursework. There were 7 lines, and so I'm trying to fit 7 in without it looking too crowded or too sparse. Now, this is the sort of detail where I will not fuss too much about accuracy in the interest of having my drawing look right. So if perhaps my proportions aren't correct and putting 7 lines in would have looked just too crammed or not enough, then I would have adjusted by taking a line out or adding an extra one. But happily, 7 lines fitted quite well to what I'd done. So I'm happy to leave that as it is. And so now, just working in the ground level, the slope. In this 1-point perspective drawing, it's not such an issue, but when the ground slopes, when it goes uphill or downhill or one direction, and when we look at our building from an angle in a 2-point perspective or a 3-point perspective view, really important to realize that the ground doesn't form one of the perspective lines. It doesn't angle to the vanishing point on the eye level the way all the other horizontal lines do, because it's not horizontal. It's only the parallel horizontal lines that go to the vanishing point, and the ground level, if it's sloped, is not that. So now I've switched to a 0.03 pen to do these little hatching marks. I really wanted to put them in and I wanted to have that little bar across each of those divisions. And so now I'm going to do the shading inside this enormous archway. You've been watching this at just over double drawing speed, and I've just sped this hatching in the doorway area up a little bit more again. But look, it's a great exercise to do, to try and draw double or half size from our reference. It's probably easier to draw half size, I think, from a larger reference, but it's great to have a go both ways. It really makes us work at focusing on proportion even more than we ordinarily should, which for most of us is great practice to do. And it's always important to measure our results and see, as I discovered, where it's accurate and where it's not. So for me, I'll pay more attention to the doorways next time. But just trying to get a sense of the detail and the depth in here. But overall, this drawing is a fairly light valued one. I haven't gone heavy, and I'm just trying to establish these windows, and I'm using my opportunity when I'm hatching them for value to just fine-tune their proportions to make them, I think, a little better fit for the photo. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, I found this really interesting to do, a bit challenging really, because I do these days mostly draw same size because it works best for the video production, but I think it's also a sensible thing for beginners to do as well. So it was fun to see how it went, trying to change what I was doing this time. So I hope you have a go changing the scale. But if not, just have a go drawing this as it is. But whatever you draw or however you draw it, make sure you have fun. Bye.